Dr. Michael E. Salla is a pioneer in the development of exopolitics, the political study of key actors, institutions, and a process associated with extraterrestrial life. His interest in exopolitics evolved out of his investigation of the sources of international conflict and its relationship to an extraterrestrial presence that is not acknowledged to the public, elected officials, or even senior military officials. Dr. Salla is an internationally recognized scholar in international politics, conflict resolution, and U.S. foreign policy. We're here on the Big Island of Hawaii to speak about Kennedy's last stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, Majestic 12, and the connection between UFO and the Kennedys. Let's get to Michael Salla right now. All right, Dr. Salla, it's the 51st anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination over there in Dallas. What's new that you could tell the Third Phase of Moon viewers about what's going on in the involvement of extraterrestrials?
What really is new here is that people are starting to open up to the possibility that President Kennedy was actually very well informed about the UFO issue, that he knew about this issue and that was related to his assassination. And one of the things that I discovered in my research was that Kennedy's knowledge of UFOs didn't just come from the time he was president. It actually came from the time that he served in the US Navy and that he was actually a friend of the Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal. And the thing that most people just don't know is that Kennedy actually went to post-war Germany and saw Nazi UFO technologies.
Incredible. We're going to be going over a Salla symposium video that we're going to be sharing exclusively right here at Third Phase of Moon, a brand new cut, never before seen publicly on YouTube right here. What I want to say is I want to get into MJ12. What is exactly MJ12?
MJ12 is the control group that was set up to take over the running of the UFO issue, the secret technology programs, the reverse engineering, how they would go around and recover crashed craft. And so that was the organization that Kennedy had to deal with if he wanted to find out what was going on with UFOs. And so from the beginning of Kennedy's administration, he was trying to deal with Majestic 12 holding back the information, and he was trying to come up with some ways to circumvent their control so that he could get access to the classified UFO files.
Incredible. Well, let's get to a clip of this incredible symposium. We'll be right back with some more inside details. Let's get to it.
So, Kennedy gets warned by Eisenhower about control of UFO files, how they're being mishandled, and presidential executive control has been basically lost. So what does Kennedy do? Well, Kennedy comes up with a strategy, and I think there were 3 phases in Kennedy's overall strategy when we look at the 3 years that he was in power. The first phase concerns executive actions Kennedy took early in his administration to gain control over psychological warfare operations.
Incredible testimony coming in. I want to ask you about the CIA and how President Kennedy wanted to get information about ET, but they gave him the railroad, and then he had to do an extra step, use his commander-in-chief, military-in-charge leadership. What did he do next?
Well, that's exactly it. When the CIA didn't respond to Kennedy's attempts to try to find out what the classified UFO files were, he was denied access. Kennedy used his power as commander-in-chief. As commander-in-chief, he can go to any military base and say, "What's here? Show me what you have." And any military officer has to respond to him. And so that's what he did. So Kennedy went to different military bases, and that's apparently where he saw some UFO bodies, some UFO material and bodies of extraterrestrials.
Wow, we're going to take a look at that segment just right after this. When we come back, I'm going to ask Dr. Salla what he thinks about the establishment known as Area 51.
So, what evidence is there that Kennedy actually did see ET artifacts on these bases, any military facilities? In his book, Need to Know, Timothy Good cites a reliable military source that Kennedy was taken to see alien bodies from Roswell. Around 1961-62, President J.F. Kennedy expressed the wish to see the alien bodies associated with an alien crash site. He had obviously been informed of their existence and wished to see for himself the evidence. According to information received, the alien bodies were taken to Florida when Kennedy went to see them at a medical facility. So the photo on the left there is Kennedy arriving at Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, 25th of November 1962. Homestead Air Force Base, interesting facility. I mean, they have medical facilities there. That's an interesting place, Homestead. Oh, does that ring a bell for anyone? Well, maybe you'll recall that President Nixon says that he took Jackie Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base to see some extraterrestrial artifacts, bodies. So there's Nixon arriving at Homestead Air Force Base in 1972. So Homestead Air Force Base was the place that they housed some of the bodies from the Roswell crash. Kennedy knew about it and he went there. Commander-in-Chief, give me access, and he got it, despite whatever CIA were basically saying at the time.
Incredible testimony again. Now let's get into, like I said, Area 51. Is it controlled by the US military, or is it some kind of independent nation of its sort?
Well, Area 51, the important thing to appreciate is that in 1955, this is when the CIA actually saw the land of that became Area 51 and actually acquired that land from the Department of Energy. So it was the CIA that had control over Area 51 from the beginning, and that's where they actually put those secret programs. And they had secret spy planes there, which were highly classified programs, but even more highly classified were the secret extraterrestrial reverse engineering technology programs that they had at Area 51 in a different location there. But on that same facility, you had two sets of classified programs, one that was more highly classified, and that was the one that the CIA had the most interest in, and that's the one that Kennedy tried to get access to but was denied access.
Now about Marilyn Monroe. Conspiracy theorists say that she was assassinated because of what she knew and what Kennedy told her. This is going to be in the next segment that we're going to show. Tell me just a little bit in regards to this.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Kennedy actually, using his powers as Commander-in-Chief, was able to get into different military bases and to actually see what was there. And he saw some bodies and he saw some UFO craft debris. And he basically was having a relationship with Marilyn Monroe at the time, and he told her about this. So she knew what Kennedy had seen. So when Kennedy and Monroe in 1962 separated, because Kennedy was basically given the ultimatum from J. Hoover that he had to separate from Monroe, who was a security threat. Monroe, out of her anger, was going to go public, and that's when she was killed.
Let's take a look at this incredible testimony right now.
Now, the important thing is that this CIA wiretap document was signed by James Angleton, Chief of Counterintelligence for the CIA. So Monroe's conversations concerning Kennedy, the visits to the military facilities to see ED artifacts, this was all being monitored by Angleton and counterintelligence for the CIA. So basically, CIA counterintelligence is very heavily involved in what it is that is being kept secret here from the American public, and wanting to know exactly what the president is knowing about this. And that's not a surprise too. If you think that the whole UFO ET issue is heavily involved with intelligence and with psychological warfare, CIA counterintelligence would be the place that would be basically where you would want to have this kind of like kept secret, even from the CIA itself. The CIA is a pretty vast organization, and so if you want to maintain secrecy, the best place to put it is in CIA counterintelligence, the mole hunters, because they're the ones that would keep secrets even from the CIA rank and file. So signature reveals Angleton's CIA counterintelligence heavily involved in events concerning classified UFO files. Documents point to Monroe's knowledge of Kennedy visiting an Air Force base to see remnants of crashed UFOs and EBEs. Okay, what else did Kennedy do? Well, this is the historical material that's probably the most contentious, and I will definitely admit that this is going to be contentious stuff for many of you, but nevertheless it's very important given the context of what Kennedy was trying to do in that period when he was denied access to UFO files. If there was any truth to the contactee movement, don't you think he would want to find out what the contactees knew? Don't you think he would basically want to ask any of these contactees if they were really having direct face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrials? Well, can you arrange one for me? Apparently that is exactly what he did.
Marilyn Monroe was an American tragedy, to say the least. Now let's get into what Kennedy did next. he wanted help from the Russian government, right? And they were causing or calling the president treasonous in his actions. Why did he want to go to the Russians for help in the UFO matter?
Well, this was really Kennedy's last attempt to try and get the information he wanted about classified UFO files. He realized that if he reached an agreement with the Soviet Union on cooperation in space, on joint missions to the moon, that he could force the CIA to share the classified UFO files with all of the different US agencies and finally the executive branch. So that's what he did. In September of 1963, he made a statement at the United Nations calling for the Soviets to cooperate on joint space and lunar missions, and the Soviets accepted on November 12, 1963, and 10 days later, Kennedy was dead.
The possibilities that a secret government or insiders wanted to take Kennedy out, we're going to get to this clip of the symposium in regards to this matter, and when we get back, I want to ask Dr. Salla of what he thinks about the lunar missions. Were they real or fake?
What were the reactions to Kennedy's his joint space lunar cooperation with the USSR speech? Well, the United Nations, I mean, that was thunderous applause. They were stunned. People around the world were really excited by this. What was the response in the United States and the Soviet Union? Very lukewarm response by Congress and NASA. Prospects of space cooperation with the USSR, bordered on treason. The idea of sharing your most sensitive files, the pearls of your military industrial efforts with the enemy, that bordered on treason. Many viewed this as almost treason. So there was very little support in the US Congress for this. And what about the Soviet Union? Well, at least the Soviet Union would be supportive, right? I mean, why take the risk? If you're going to get your Congress upset, at least you have the Soviet Union being excited, right? Public response by the Soviet Union? Silence. Nothing. Privately, what's Khrushchev saying? Khrushchev privately refused. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. Didn't want to share the Soviet secret with the USSR. So nevertheless, Kennedy continues to reach out to Khrushchev in the USSR to accept his offer. Why? Why would Kennedy do it? Why, piss off your constituency, Congress, even people in the military, Commander-in-Chief, they'd look at you and say, this is almost treason, right? NASA aren't supportive. The Soviet Union isn't interested. So why are you doing this? There has to be a subplot. What's the subplot? What's the agenda here? The agenda is what I've been saying. Kennedy needed to get control. He knew that this was the only way he could get control finally. He's been in office for his third year. He's tried everything to try and get access to the UFO files, been denied access by the CIA, Majestic 12. He's been visiting classified military facilities to try and gain access. Had some success, but eventually runs into a brick wall.
If President Kennedy was going to the Russians to get cooperation, he must have been desperate. Now let's get to the question I wanted to get to Dr. Salla in regards to the lunar missions. Have we been to the moon?
Yes, I think there's a lot of evidence that we've been to the moon. We have a lot of satellite photography, a lot of astronauts who have come back to give their testimony. A lot of people have been up in space now, and they have all said pretty much the same thing in terms of these missions being real, and they witnessed things out there. I mean, as to exactly what they saw on the moon, there's a lot of questions about whether or not the astronauts were subjected to mind control to kind of like filter out some of the stuff, and I think that's very possible that Neil Armstrong and the other astronauts saw things on the moon, extraterrestrial technologies, and the mind control basically made them forget about that. But nevertheless, I think they did get to the moon.
Good to know. On the record, Dr. Salla. Now let's get to this CIA ordered directive of an assassination of President Kennedy?
Well, that's right, yes. In 1961, when the CIA director Alan Dulles was on his way out of the job, he drafted a set of directives for how to deal with President Kennedy and his administration, because Kennedy was asking a lot of questions about UFOs and wanting to get access. And so these directives basically were for the rest of the MJ-12 members, how they were going to respond to Kennedy's efforts and people in his administration. And one of the directives was called Project Environment. And Project Environment said when the environment is difficult, for MJ12 flourishing, then it must be wet. The term "it must be wet" is an assassination directive, and that directive was something that was later applied in the case of Kennedy when he was trying to cooperate with the Soviet Union in getting the CIA to share its UFO files.
Dr. Salla, incredible insight. I want to thank you very much for sharing this incredible knowledge to Third Phase Moon. Do you think we're going to get disclosure from the government, or is ET going to make itself present to the world?
I think we're going to get so much information coming out from UFOs, from other world governments, and even organizations like the Vatican, that eventually people are going to understand that we do actually have extraterrestrials visiting us. And eventually that's going to force the government to release some information. But I don't think everyone in the government knows that much, so it's going to be up to the public to kind of like get up to speed as we get these disclosures from other governments like Russia, and the Vatican, I think, is going to be playing a big role in this as well.
Dr. Salla, thank you very much for joining us right here at Third Phase Moon. Make sure you take a look at his book, order it online. Incredible insights. Kennedy's Last Stand. Everybody, keep your eyes on the skies. We're not alone. My name is Blake Cousins. We'll see you again next time. Incredible book. Can't wait to...
on joint space missions, and he needs the cooperation of the USSR to do it. A very bold initiative. The USSR initially says no, but then there's an about face. On November 11, 1963, Khrushchev, according to Khrushchev's son, Sergei, accepted Kennedy's offer. November 11, Kennedy's assassinated November 22nd. Keep that in mind. 11 days later, he's assassinated. So, Khrushchev accepts. What's Kennedy do? Okay, things begin to happen. November 12th, the next day, Kennedy issues a memorandum, National Security Action Memorandum number 271 on November 12, 1963. The subject header was Cooperation with the USSR on Outer Space Matters, and addressed to the NASA Administrator. Quote, I would like you to assume personally the initiative and central responsibility within the government for the development of a program of substantive cooperation with the Soviet Union in the field of outer space, including the development of specific technical proposals. So this is basically a very bold memorandum saying cooperation is going to be happening. I want you to share all the information that's going to make this level of cooperation possible. And this is a genuine document, NSA M 271 has been released, and that's an authentic government document. So that the NASA Administrator was given those instructions by Kennedy on November 12th, 10 days before the assassination. Another memo, a top secret memo. That earlier memo was confidential. It was eventually released under Freedom of Information. That was a confidential memo. This one is a top secret memo to the CIA Director, John McCone at the time. On the same day, November 12th, Kennedy issued a top secret memorandum to the Director, and the subject header was Classification Review of All Intelligence Files Affecting National Security. The top secret memorandum went on to say, quote, I've instructed James Webb, the NASA Administrator, to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar explorations. It would be very helpful if you would have the high threat UFO cases reviewed with the purpose of identification of bona fides as opposed to classified CIA and US Air Force files. When this data has been sorted out, I would like you to arrange a program of data sharing with NASA where unknowns UFOs are a factor. This will help NASA missions directors in their defensive responsibilities. I would like an interim report on the data review no later than February 1st, 1964. Well, this was the thing that really kind of set off the alarm bells. This was the thing that caused chaos. Because imagine, UFO classified files are all held in, they're controlled by CIA counterintelligence. You have the military intelligence community also with some control of these files. But Majestic 12, it's basically working through CIA counterintelligence. Increasingly, all of these files are put under this repository of CIA counterintelligence. This information is going to be taken from a very secure location that was tightly controlled to one where it's shared. I mean, the Soviet Union, well, they would have known a lot of this stuff anyway. Maybe that wasn't really the thing that they were concerned about, but it was the other US institutions that they were really concerned about, because once the State Department, the rank and file CIA, NASA have access to these UFO files, the secret's going to be blown. You can't keep it. I mean, that was the thing. That was the real worry. The Soviet Union, I mean, they had their own secrecy system. They weren't really the concern here. Sharing classified UFO files with the Soviet Union, that wasn't a big deal. Never was. But sharing it with NASA and having that spill over to the other US bureaucracies, that was the threat. That was the thing that was really going to create chaos. There was a hotline conversation, and this is another Majestic 12 document. And it's allegedly a top secret NSA intercept of a hotline conversation between President Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev dated November 12, 1963. Kennedy and Khrushchev discussed the importance of their respective UFO workshop groups to deal with the UFO problem to avoid the risk of future conflict. Kennedy tells Khrushchev, quote, "I've begun an initiative without NASA to exchange information with your Academy of Sciences in which I hope will foster mutual concern over this problem and hopefully find some resolution." So that's confirmed, that's consistent with NSAM 271, which I mentioned is an official document. So that particular phrase is supported by the historical facts. Kennedy also said, "I have also instructed our CIA to provide me with full disclosure on the phantom aspects and classified programs which I can better assess the UFO situation." This is confirmed in that other that top secret memorandum to the CIA director. So that hotline conversation is consistent with some of the documents that I've mentioned, some of the historical documents and some of the Majestic documents. But the most important source of confirmation, I think, for the hotline conversation as authentic is that the statement that I made earlier that Sergei Khrushchev, Dr. Sergei Khrushchev, the son of Nikita Khrushchev, confirmed that on November 11, Khrushchev finally accepted Kennedy's offer. One day later, you have those memorandums. So don't you think there would have been a direct hotline conversation between Khrushchev and Kennedy? I think it's pretty consistent with historical documents and facts at the time that there would have been a hotline conversation between Kennedy and Khrushchev. I mean, how else would Kennedy have received confirmation from Khrushchev? I mean, yeah, sure, diplomatic communication and so forth, but that would have taken up time. I mean, if Khrushchev accepts on November 11 and Kennedy is releasing documents a day later, this couldn't have been just a matter of wire cables and so forth going back between the US embassy and the Russian embassy. There was a hotline conversation between them, and I think the NSA document, the NSA hotline conversation document, I think that's pretty consistent with the historical facts, and I think that helps me have confidence that it is an authentic document. So the authenticity is supported by NSA 271, the memo to the CIA director, and Sergei Khrushchev's revelations later. Space cooperation, that's a misspelling, with the USSR would ensure that classified UFO files would be genuinely shared amongst US institutions. I think this was the thing Kennedy was really aiming for. It wasn't a matter of sharing classified UFO files with the Soviet Union. They knew what was going on. It was sharing these files with US institutions, as I mentioned. NASA, CIA rank and file, the State Department, all branches of the US military. These files needed to be shared, and that would have ensured presidential executive oversight. That was ultimately what Kennedy was driving at here. And that his national security team, the National Security Council, would assert a direct presidential executive control. Basically, he was doing an end run around MJ-12. Whatever system MJ-12 had set up, however they had worked with CIA counterintelligence to basically quarantine this level of information from the rest of the US political system and military institutions and the intelligence community, Kennedy was doing an end run around that. And this is what really, in the end, led to the confrontation. James Angleton and the MJ-12 assassination directive. On the bottom of Kennedy's memorandum to the CIA director of November 12, 1963, 10 days before the assassination, next to the signature on that November 12 document appears the following handwriting, quote, Response from Colby, that's William Colby, who eventually became Director of Central Intelligence, but at the time was the head of Far East Asia, Vietnam and so forth, covert operations for the CIA. Response from Colby, Angleton has MJ-12 directive. And that's dated the 20th of November 1963, 2 days before the Kennedy assassination. Colby is acknowledging that Angleton, 2 days before, had the MJ-12 directives and was using them to respond to Kennedy. This handwriting directly implicates Angleton in the Kennedy assassination due to the cryptic MJ-12 assassination directive. And there's an important statement by Timothy Cooper, and I think it's on the MJ-12 documents website, that basically says that when the burned document was released, and that Colby was basically identified, or that this burned document basically made it possible to trace the involvement of Angleton to MJ-12 directives and the Kennedy assassination. That with the release of that document, that shortly afterwards, William Colby died mysteriously, drowning in the Chesapeake Bay. And I think, and he was an expert swimmer, so I think we probably have the fingerprints there of an operation to get rid of Colby, given that Colby's handwriting was on this November 12 document, basically saying that Angleton had the MJ-12 directives. Colby knew about the MJ directives, so he was someone that could basically spill the beans and confirm whether the burned document was real or not. But of course, Colby is mysteriously drowns. So what does all this mean? I've got, what, 5 minutes? Okay, 5 minutes. The assassination directive, in my mind, represented a covert coup by MJ-12 that, through CIA counterintelligence, had the means to deny any presidential administration access to UFO files, and even forcefully remove any uncooperative federal official. I think what eventually happened was that because of the assassination directive being implemented and a president actually being killed under the direct orders of MJ-12 by CIA counterintelligence, that was under the control of Angleton at the time, I think MJ-12, the kind of being a purely American-controlled institution, I think the writing was on the wall for that organisation. They basically knew that there had to be a drastic reorganisation here. Whether out of shame, whether out of guilt, whatever it was, that I think those people on MJ-12 that authorised this basically accepted or acquiesced to MJ-12 becoming an international organisation with greater corporate involvement and control over classified UFO files. Basically, American control was lost. And I think this is reflected in a number of statements, and this is probably the subject of another presentation, but there's an example there, Ben Rich's statement saying that in 1969, the control of classified UFO files was placed under the control of an international board of directors. So conclusion, Eisenhower began the process of formal meetings and agreements involving nuclear diplomacy and extraterrestrial technologies. He regretted the loss of executive presidential authority over extraterrestrial affairs and the influence that had been ceded to MJ-12 and corporations. Eisenhower almost certainly warned Kennedy about MJ-12. Kennedy's attempt to regain executive presidential authority directly challenged the existence of MJ-12 and was the key factor in his assassination. What does all this mean? Well, basically there is a lot of history behind US government policy on extraterrestrial life. I think that this history ranges over a number of areas: secret agreements, joint US ET bases, funding mechanisms for this vast apparatus of agreements and bases that, as I mentioned last night, can be as high as $1.7 trillion a year. Imagine trying to get the American public to swallow that. The American public is kind of up in arms that reforming healthcare would cost $1 trillion over 10 years. They're up in arms. Congress is up in arms. $1 trillion in 10 years. Imagine if they learn that there's a secret black budget of $1.7 trillion every year. I think they'd swallow that. Managing personnel in covert operations, suppressing advanced technologies in the public sector, covert defense policy on extraterrestrials, defense, Star Wars, false flag operations and ET policy. I mentioned that majestic logistics plan, covert operations, psychological warfare, logistics, well, false flag operations would fall under that. Exopolitics, the history and its future, looking at public policy implications of all of the data is inevitable. People are excited by this. Those that think it's all about lights in the sky, the reality is people are excited about policy implications of the data. You're not going to stop people being interested in this. And so this needs to be done in a very professional or scholarly way. And so those of us in the exopolitics community, we're trying as hard as we can with the limited resources we have to do this. It's not easy because we're attacked by those that are supporting UFOs, but attacking public policy speculation on this. But nevertheless, it needs to be done. Spinning ET disclosure. I think this is something I briefly mentioned last night. Disclosure, how's it going to happen? I think it's going to happen in a way where a lot of this history is kept secret so that the national security system doesn't collapse. But nevertheless, there is going to be disclosure of some nature happening very shortly, in my view. And my book that's just come out, it's a 2009 book. I have enough copies, or hopefully I brought enough copies here for you. It covers all of these areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.